Yeah, I give them what some fans have said jokingly, the epitome of meh.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Welcome to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. I'm joined today by James Woollard. James is the PA announcer for the Seattle Sounders. And for any of you that have been to a Sounders match, you've heard him in the stands. James, your accent, are you from, is it Linwood? What?
Not exactly.
Not exactly. Okay. So I can't quite place it. No, in all seriousness, welcome to the show. And then
thank you.
How did you end up in Seattle?
Yeah, it's quite a long story, I guess. I grew up in the United Kingdom, in England, to be precise, in a place called Cambridge, which is about an hour north of London. I actually grew up on a farm. My father was a farmer in Cambridgeshire, so rural part of Cambridgeshire. And yeah, I had a childhood on the farm, which was fun. Went to the local state schools, government schools, as you'd call them here, and eventually went off to college and studied geography, and ended up being a teacher of geography in the UK. Never really had any plans to live abroad. I liked traveling, but never thought it was a possibility that I would live in another country permanently. But in, 1998, I decided to explore opportunities abroad. Teaching is one of those professions which does actually allow you to travel quite easily. Teachers are in demand around the world, especially if you can speak English. It's pretty easy to get jobs in foreign countries. But I initially actually got a job in the Cayman Islands, in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean as we call it in England. And Cayman Islands is actually, technically, it's a British overseas territory. So the kids in the schools there largely follow the British curriculum. And so it was really easy. If you're thinking of traveling abroad as a teacher, I really picked kind of like the easy way to do it, because I ended up in an English-speaking country or overseas territory of the United Kingdom, and was basically teaching the same type of material, the same courses that I was teaching back in England. And it was, England, where I grew up, is grey and dreary in the wintertime, like Seattle is. I know you're from Wenatchee, so you probably see the sun in the wintertime, but we don't.
I grew up in Tacoma.
Oh, okay. So
and I've lived 55 years of my life on the west side.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with
our winters. And
yes.
So English winters are grey and dreary. And so to go from Cambridge, England, to the Caribbean was like, I'm on vacation permanently. This is amazing. And it was great. I got into scuba diving and spent countless hours just laying around on the beach at the weekends and looking around at the tourists, thinking how much they'd spent to go on vacation there. Well, for me it was free, so it was kind of fun. But it's a very small island. It's 20 miles long. It's 10 miles wide. So it's like living, in the San Juans. You kind of get that island fever a little bit. You can obviously get off the island, but it costs you a lot of money every time because you have to fly off. And so it eventually got to me that I was living on this tiny island, and I decided to explore other opportunities in other countries. I looked again. wanting a little bit of the easy way out, I explored English-speaking countries. I looked at Canada. I looked at the US. I seriously considered New Zealand and Australia, and randomly applied for jobs around the world, and ended up getting a job in Bremerton, of all places. So I went from Cambridge, England, to the Caribbean, Cayman Islands, to Bremerton. So it was kind of like a return to the grey, dreary England, but a huge contrast physically from where I grew up. Where I grew up in Cambridge was, we say, flat as a pancake. Is literally, I think, the highest point in East Anglia, which is that region of England, is like a few hundred feet. And so to come again, it appealed to my travel bug in me. I wanted to go somewhere interesting that was different from just going back to Cambridge again and returning back to England. And so in 2002, I came to live in Bremerton. I worked at a school there, and eventually found my way across to the east side, and have been working in another school in Redmond since about 2003, 2004. Actually, I only spent 1 year in Bremerton, not because I didn't like it, but I think I wanted more opportunities, and the east side provided that with more schools and stuff.
Okay. So you took up scuba diving when you're in the Caribbean. Yep. Did you know that Puget Sound is actually considered an excellent place to scuba dive?
Yes, and I actually haven't done any scuba diving here, but you're right, it is. I think I'm a scaredy cat because it's so flipping cold here to go scuba diving. And I know in the summer it's nice, but in the winter months you'd probably need a dry suit, and I don't have all the equipment, so I actually haven't dived, or dove, as the Americans say, at all since I came to live in the States. I did go back and visit the Caribbean a few times, or a couple of times, and I did some diving then. But I've kind of wimped out because of the cold temperatures in the Puget Sound. But I hear it's very nice, and I hear the visibility is surprisingly good, actually.
It doesn't. I don't understand, because I'm not a scuba diver. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of with you. The idea mm-hmm. of getting into, say, Puget Sound doesn't sound like fun. It sounds cold, and it might be interesting, but I think that's because you're so numb that you can't see straight. I don't know. Anyway, I've read that, and I have friends that are scuba divers, and they assure me that it is amazing.
Well, and the Caribbean has got fantastic visibility and such an array of fish and coral. I think it would be hard to beat that. So I don't want to be disappointed if I went scuba diving around here and think, oh, this is not as fun,
It'd be completely different, I'm sure, than what you experienced originally.
Yeah.
All right. So you moved to Bremerton. You ended up on the east side in the Redmond area.
Yep.
What came first, being a voice actor or being the PA announcer?
Oh, definitely the former. But the former led to the latter. So I think I did one voiceover job when I was in the Caribbean, and back in England, people had said, oh, "I like your voice" and whatever, but I'd never even considered that as something to do. But when I came to live in the States, I think it's because the Americans genuinely like the British accent. A lot of people just commented, "Oh, I like your voice. Say something." They would say, especially the kids in school. And then they would also laugh every time I mispronounce a word or something like that. But I think enough people said they liked the sound of my voice and my accent that I seriously considered pursuing voiceover work as a sort of a part-time sideline gig kind of thing. And I honestly had no clue how to do that. Like I said, I hadn't really considered it back in England, and hadn't really crossed my mind. But I decided I'm going to explore this, and I literally got on the internet and Googled, how do you become a voice actor? And one of the things that stood out was you first of all, you should get some training if you can. Find somebody who trains professional voiceover folk, and that was really my opening. So I actually in the Seattle area, there's a lady named Veronica Weikel. I don't know if you've heard of her, but
I have not.
She is very well known, especially in this area, as a voice trainer, as somebody who you should go to if you want to get into the voiceover industry. So, and back in the day, so like 2003, 2004, when I started to look into this, she and her husband, who's an audio engineer, lived in Wallingford, and they ran like weekend courses training people to get into the voiceover industry. And I remember I did a couple of those with her, and it was a small group training. And one of the things I remember her telling me at the time, and I was quite in awe of, she would drop in there, my past clients have done this and that. And I was like, I haven't done anything really. And I was very much, open-eyed and in awe of the fact that she had these people who had done these amazing things. But she did say to me, you got to make sure that you get plenty of training, because there's nothing worse than presenting yourself to an agent and you got nothing, no evidence to back it up that you're a good voiceover person. So I did enough training with her, and I cut a demo CD. That was when CDs existed. Cut a demo CD, and I literally then went around using Veronica's advice to get yourself an agent. And I literally drove from around Seattle area and dropped off my CD and say, hi, I have no experience in this, but here's my demo. I'd like to get into the voiceover industry. Would you give me a shot? Very kindly, there was a agency in Kirkland named Dramatic Artists, and they gave me I think they wanted a British person on their books, so they said, yeah, we'll have you, which was great. And once you have an agent, that an agent basically sends you auditions and gets you to record auditions at home. And to begin with, again, you need to get equipped if you're going to get into the voiceover industry. I had a really awful microphone, which is kind of amusing because I'm just recording this on a really awful microphone at the moment. But I actually do have a mini recording studio. And once I got equipped, and they'd send me auditions, and I'd send back my demo and the example recording for the audition, and I started to get a few jobs, not many. It was back then, and I think it's increasingly so, a very tough business to get into. There's so many people who are vying to be voiceover talents, and it's so easy now, actually, with the technology that's available. Like we're illustrating now, we're talking to each other on microphones and whatever. A lot of people have access to the equipment to do this now. So, but I was able to get a few jobs, not many. And one job I got in 2007 was for a product. It was actually Pacific Cod, the fish.
Okay.
And the idea behind the little commercial that we were doing was Pacific Cod is widely available. It's delicious. Compare that with Atlantic Cod, which is on the demise. And it was 6 British guys, real British guys, selected for this little commercial thing. And we were sitting around a pub that was supposed to look like a British pub, but it was actually in Queen Anne. And we were bemoaning the collapse of the Atlantic cod industry. And then somebody pipes up, but have you considered Pacific cod? And that was the theme of the commercial. Anyway, kind of a random thing, but it was one of those doors that was opened because what happened was 2 years later, the Seattle Sounders began as an MLS franchise, and somebody from the organization reached out to me and said, and it just so happened that was Victory Studios, which is where we recorded that commercial. It is the same recording studio used by the Seahawks and the Sounders, who were then kind of in a business relationship. Somebody who worked for the Seahawks Sounders had also seen that Victory Studios commercial and said, "We like the sound of your voice. Would you be willing to audition to be the stadium announcer, the public address announcer for the Seattle Sounders?" And I'm listening on the phone, like, and I was like, seriously, kind of thing. I mean, I had zero experience in sports broadcasting, public address announcing. So there was all of that. And then the other thing I was thinking of at this point in my career, I was a school principal. It's like, where am I going to find the time to do this kind of thing? But I didn't say all that to him. I was just thinking it in my mind. I'm the least qualified person you want for this job. But I said, oh yeah, I'll come in. I'll audition for it. And not surprisingly, I don't think I auditioned that well. They didn't in the end select me to be the public address announcer at that point in time, but they did say, well, we really like your voice. We would like to still use you for the club. There's something called gate scripts, which when you're buying tickets to the game, or if you're walking up to the stadium, if any sport will have this, you'll hear somebody over the loudspeaker system, the tannoy, telling people what they can bring in to the stadium, what they shouldn't bring into the stadium, where you can buy your tickets, etc. So they said, we would like you to use you for the gate scripts. And I think the reason for that was I probably had quite a formal sounding voice, and people can quite easily understand my accent. I don't have a particularly strong regional dialect accent, and so they thought, well, you'd be good to be that person to just explain the rules and regulations, etc. So I was for the first 2 years, 2009, 2010, I did the gate scripts for the club, which was looking back, that was a really good thing for my career, because I kept that connection with the club. Mm-hmm. If I'd been a real diva back in 2009, I might have said, "Oh, you've rejected me for this public address announcer position. I don't need your gate scripts," kind of thing, which would have been a pathetic thing to do. But I'm glad I didn't, because I kept that connection with the club. And as it turned out, at the beginning of 2011, I went in to record the gate scripts again, because it's a pre-recorded thing. This was like February 2011, and the guy who was my contact said, we'd actually it turns out the public address announcer that was originally selected is no longer with us. It turns out that we're doing more auditions. Would you like to have another go? And I said yes. And by this point, I was a little bit more experienced in, I'd taken time to listen to public address announcers and read about it and watch videos, etc. So I felt a bit more equipped to do it, but I still felt pretty green, and not necessarily the most highly qualified person for the job. But I said, "Yep, I'd love to give it a go." And behind the scenes, I didn't know this, they were auditioning at other preseason games, and I think literally about 4 days before the opening game of the season, they said, "Well, we want you to call the opening game of the 2011 season. So we want you to be the stadium announcer for that game. That's going to be your audition." It's like, what? So whereas in 2009, all I'd done was gone into a studio and pretended to be an announcer. In this case, 2011, I was going to be the announcer at the game. And I had done one game. I forgot to mention, I'd done one game back in 2009. They'd called me in as a substitute announcer. So I'd had my little trial by fire back then. So 2011, start of the season, March 2011, the game was against LA Galaxy, David Beckham's team. I think David was there at the time. So they came into Seattle and I announced that game, and the rest is history. So I've been doing it ever since.
Okay, so I've got some questions.
Okay, I bet you have.
Yeah, I've got some questions. I've lived my entire life at Washington State. Mm-hmm. But it does seem to me that Americans, are totally enamored with the British accent.
Yeah.
Are the British enamored with any accent?
That's interesting. Personally, I would say I love the French accent.
Okay.
I think it sounds very romantic and
Okay.
nice to listen to. And I do like some of the American accents, some, but not all. I'll be diplomatic. I won't mention the ones I don't like so much.
Okay.
But,
Well, I just think it's funny.
Yeah, it is. It is a strange phenomenon how different cultures appreciate other accents, and it's it's a myth in a sense, because if you think about the range of British accents, some of them are not pleasant. And I lived in Birmingham for 10 years, which is where Ozzy Osbourne comes from.
Okay.
I think that's one of the worst accents in the world. You know, my name's Ozzy Osbourne. I used to be the lead singer for Black Sabbath, and I bite the heads off bats or pigeons. You know, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I just hate that accent.
You articulated that way too clearly, by the way.
Yes,
would not have been able to understand Ozzy if he said that.
But it's funny, I'm not alone in that. I've read several articles that say within England, the British people least like the Birmingham accent. So, and it's also a myth. I think people in America think, oh, the British are so intelligent because they can speak like that. And I can definitely assure you that is a myth too.
Right.
But why not play along with it? If they think I'm intelligent and cultured, I'll go with it.
You take it. When you took your voiceover classes,
yes,
what did they teach you? What was the training like?
Yeah. Well, it's a long time ago now, so I'm having to think back. I think a lot of it was kind of on the job training, as it were. They would give you a commercial script for some random product, and they would probably demonstrate, the sound that they were looking for. With commercials, it depends on the type of the commercial, I guess, but they always want you to sound enthusiastic and smiley, and literally as you smile, you sound happier about a product, and you don't go down at the end of a sentence, you go up, because that sounds much more interesting, and you vary the tone of your sentences, because to listen to somebody speaking in a monotone is very boring, and you'll probably switch off your radio. So that's the kind of thing they did it. And a lot of on-the-job trial and error, recording, listening to yourself, critiquing, that sort of thing. But I guess it was enough to teach me the basics. But there are some people in the voiceover industry that literally make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. He's now deceased, unfortunately, but the guy that did In a World, Don LaFontaine, before every movie trailer, In a World where Scott Cowan became the baseball announcer for the Wenatchee Apple Sox. You already told me that, but that's people like that, they get a reputation, and they're like, okay, we'll give you the job, and they're like paid $30,000 a spot. That's never happened to me, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, there's still time. There's still time.
Yeah.
Before. So this is another preconceived notion that I have. Soccer, football.
Yeah.
Is not. It's growing in popularity in this country, but it seems like in the rest of the world, it is the dominant, attention-grabbing sport.
Yes.
Were you I'm just going to say soccer, sorry. Were you a soccer fan growing up? Was this new to you?
Well, like you said, it's the dominant sport in the rest of the world. In fact, I recently read there are 4 billion fans of soccer, which, considering the world's population, that's like over half the world's population, I believe.
That actually seems small to me.
Yeah,
I would have
said now.
Yeah, I'd say 6 billion.
Yeah,
And be like, oh, yeah.
it cycles a bit with the World Cup, as
Mhm.
interest wanes and goes up or whatever. But yes, growing up, I wasn't what one would call an ultra fan. Like, I didn't have season tickets to a particular team, but my first introduction to soccer, football, was probably as a 7, 8-year-old, going along to Cambridge United games. Cambridge United is a soccer club in Cambridge that has a fairly small stadium. I think they can only seat like 6 or 7 thousand, I believe. So it's
Okay.
kind of a tiny club, but in my 8-year-old eyes, it was like this huge stadium. And I was taken along by a friend in the village who did, I think, have season tickets. And that was my first introduction to professional football. And I've always enjoyed playing it as a kid. In fact, I would say 90% of kids in England grow up playing soccer at break time, recess, lunch times, and after school and at weekends with their friends. It's a very easy sport to play. You just really need a ball. You
Mhm.
can make goalposts out of jerseys thrown on the ground,
Right.
And I think that's part of the appeal of soccer, is it's such an easy sport to do. There's no highly technical equipment you need aside from the ball. So I played it, and then I loved watching it. I remember back in '71. I'm 56, so I would have been 6 then, watching the FA Cup and collecting these little medals for the FA Cup teams that had won over the years, because it was the centenary of the FA Cup in that year. And so I've always taken a strong interest. Nowadays, I'm a one club person. I support the Seattle Sounders, but I get up every weekend. I don't know if you know it, but the English Premier League is broadcast every weekend here on a Saturday and a Sunday. You can get up and you can watch it on the TV. So I enjoy watching high tier, high quality soccer on the TV. I love watching the World Cup. I watched the World Cup qualifier last night between Mexico and the US. So it's definitely a sport I like to watch, and I like to not so much play now. I'm getting a bit old, but definitely I would consider myself a fan, but never. I wasn't particularly loyal to any particular club in the UK, and now I consider myself a fan of the Sounders.
So when you started the job, you
Yep.
already knew the sport. It wasn't like if they called me up to be the PA announcer, they'd have to. The learning curve would be, I just don't know the sport.
Right. Yeah. No. I think that was an advantage. I think the club probably wanted somebody, obviously, who knew the sport. I think the British accent was a bonus. It kind of added to that European flavor of the sport. But yeah, coming in, knowing the game, or not being an expert necessarily, and not never having really played at a high tier level, that wasn't so much an important issue as just being familiar with the basic rules and regulations of the game.
Okay. Let's talk then. So you started being the PA announcer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like you to explain what the Sounders expect that role to do.
Okay.
What is your job expectation?
Right. Well, on game day itself, I typically turn up a couple of hours before the actual kickoff of the game. There is a pre-prepared script, which can be multiple pages long. A lot of it is, short sponsorship reads, commercial reads for stuff, for companies that sponsor the Sounders. Some of it's rules and regulation reads. Some of it's like talking about what's happening on the field. It's when the players come on to practice, we'll announce them coming onto the field. I announce the lineups, I announce the goals. Anyway, I get there 2 hours before in order to make sure that I go through the script, and I'm fully prepared. I have probably seen it before. We have electronic scripts, so I can access those before, and usually I've read through it once or twice before, even getting to the stadium. But that is a final read through time, and then about an hour before kickoff is when I actually start talking, because that's when they open the stadium up to the fans to come in.
Okay.
So we'll start off with, welcome to the stadium kind of thing, and then that will go on for the next hour. There's all sorts of reads before we actually do kickoff. The big thing is I'll announce our team, and we have a very scripted method of doing that. It's one of the highlights of the games. So I'll say, and here's the Delta starting 11 for your Seattle Sounders Football Club. And then I'll go through the roster, the 11 players who are starting the game for the Sounders. And I'll say their position, I'll say their number, and I'll say their first name. And then the crowd, it's very interactive. The crowd will chant back their second name. So it's really fun. So I'll go, in goal, number 24. Stefan, and the crowd will chant back, Fry. He's our captain, Stefan Fry. So we'll go through our 11 players on that kind of call and response thing, back and forth. And I think, personally for me, it's one of the highlights of the game because it's so interactive. And I think the fans really like it too. So
how did that come about? I mean, that wasn't by design, was it? Or
it evolved. I think I'm not sure they did it in the first 2 years just quite like that, and I can't remember exactly when it happened, but for as long as I can remember, we've done first and last name, and it may be copied from another club around the world that does that style of announcing. But we do exactly the same thing for the goals as well. So that's really fun. So I'll go, Sounders FC, goal! Scored by number 13, Jordan. And then the crowd will chant back, Morris. And I'll say it again, Jordan. And the crowd will shout back, Morris. And I'll say it a third time, Jordan. And the crowd will say, Morris. So that's the way we announce goals as well. Again, it's a highly interactive thing between me and the crowd. And again, I think it's something that I think the crowd really enjoys.
Yeah. Well, so that's very different than, say, baseball, American football, basketball.
Right.
Is this sort of call and response prevalent in other, like in the Premier League? Would that be something you would see if I was tuning into a Premier League game?
Actually, I don't think so much in the Premier League. I think this is an idea that came from Germany. Okay. I think the Bundesliga, which is the German equivalent of the Premier League, did that. And it's been copied by several American teams. But I would say it's a hugely successful way and fun way of doing lineups, doing goal calls. And it is kind of, like you said, it's kind of peculiar to soccer. I'm not aware of it in other sports. There might be other sports that do it. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Oh, I like the idea of it because it engages the crowd. The crowd's invested in paying attention and
exactly
and paying, going along. I've been to one Sounders match, and I was that confused guy up in the stands. You probably saw me just looking around going, I'm not sure what's going on here, but it was fun. I didn't know what was going on. This whole thing was scarves. I will get to that in a minute. I don't understand. And the ritual of it, if you will, was really
I think
interesting.
It's funny you use the word ritual. I think sport's kind of like a religion to many people, and it has its own rituals or liturgy. And going to a soccer game is kind of like going to church, but with a different liturgy.
Yeah, no, I think that's true for absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
So your job, so you're there a couple hours before your mic is on for the first, once the gates are open, you're on the clock.
Correct.
And then you introduce the roster. Now, are you introducing the opposition as well?
Yes, but not so enthusiastically.
And so are you just going, and now number 5, Bill Jones?
It kind of exactly like that, actually. Yeah, I give them what some fans have said jokingly, the epitome of meh. Basically, as least, well, with little enthusiasm. You still have to maintain the volume because the crowd has to hear you say the names. You can't just mumble the names. But basically, I do the complete opposite of what you're not supposed to do as a voiceover talent. Okay. With a voiceover talent, you're supposed to sound interesting and enthusiastic, and you vary your tone a little bit, and blah, blah, blah. But when I'm introducing the opposing team, they get none of that. So and the crowd love it because they, in the south end of the stadium where the Emerald City Supporters Group, which is the biggest supporters group of the Sounders, stand, they'll literally turn their back on the pitch. They'll look up at the big screen, and as I announce the opposing players, they'll shout back, "Who?" Like, basically, you're an inconsequential person to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and that's a way of giving, relatively speaking, them, the opposing team, not very much home advantage, whereas we get all the home advantage.
Right.
And it's allowed. It's some people would say, well, that's not good sportsmanship to do that, but hey, that's part of the fun of being at home. You get to create that home field advantage and atmosphere, and I'll pump up our names. And if they score, if the opposing team scores, I will announce it just like I announce them as the roster. I will say goal scored by LA Galaxy. With very little enthusiasm. I mean, enough volume that the crowd can hear, but the crowd at that point are just ticked off that the opposition have scored. They don't want to hear me tell them, so basically I get rid of that quickly.
It's the thing is also, though, is there's an entertainment value here.
Oh yeah.
And this is, I'm of the opinion, the way you're describing it is this is good natured showmanship.
It's comedy. It's PA comedy.
And if you were to be in attendance down in LA at a Galaxy's Sounders match, I would guess that your peer for calling the game for the LA Galaxy would do something
exactly the same.
Or in his whatever his or her style was. But the Sounders name they would, and now number 5, Freddie Montero.
Yeah. They're not gonna give us any enthusiasm.
No.
Now, the only time when you might get into trouble for doing that is if you're maybe hosting at a neutral venue or something like that, and then that's different. You want to give equal weight to both sides, but
sure.
But normally when we're at home, I'll pump up our names. I'll be enthusiastic about our goals, and the opposite for the opposition.
Have you ever given any thought to doing radio or TV play-by-play? Do you want to do that, or do you like this role that you have?
No, I like this role, and actually, I know the limits of my talent. To be a play-by-play person, you really have to be extremely knowledgeable about the sport, and I wouldn't put myself in that category. Usually a lot of the play-by-play folks are former players themselves, or they've done enough commentary that they've really become very, very good at it. I couldn't do that. I don't consider myself to have, I don't know if you have this expression in America, the gift of the gab. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do.
The ability to just ramble incessantly about anything.
Right. No,
I think the best play-by-play announcers are really it's a highly skilled job, and I don't think I could do that. Partly because of lack of expertise, partly because I think I would run out of words, and then there'd be blank spaces, and people would wonder why I got the job.
So after the match is over, are you? I mean, you started an hour before, so are you still being a public address announcer after the match? Are you telling people to exit calmly, or remain calm all as well? Or
so I'm a public address announcer right through to the end. There's very little that's said during the run of play other than goal calls, substitutes, yellow cards, that sort of thing. Then there'll be a halftime break, and I'll do my spiel again. There'll be 15 minutes of announcements, and then after the game, there's a few closing reads, but typically they last no more than about 10 minutes, and then I'm done after the end of the game. So actually that's quite fun. If there's an afternoon game, I'll go out afterwards with some friends, who are fans, and we'll have a drink or go for a meal or something like that. If it's an evening game and I've finished late, I'll probably just go home at that point.
Okay. So during your career as the PA announcer, what's some of the memorable things that you've witnessed?
Yeah, I have, a number of favorite things. Trying to think now. Back in, I think it was 2011, one of our star players got injured, broke his leg, unfortunately, in an away game. His name's Steve Zakuani, and then literally a year later to the day, he came back after rehabbing. And so introducing him onto the pitch as a substitute was one of those spine-tingling moments. 2014, we won the Supporters' Shield at home, and I'll explain to that. The Supporters' Shield is basically, it goes to the team that has the most points in the regular season, not including the playoffs. So in 2014, we were considered the best regular season team in the whole league, and winning that at home was really fun, and announcing the goals for that. In 2016, I remember one of our forwards, Nelson Valdez, who hadn't scored for forever, finally scored in the playoffs, and that was like amazing. And so announcing his goal, and in 2016, we won the MLS Cup, which is the equivalent of the Super Bowl, basically the playoffs after the season has ended. That was in Toronto, but I got to kind of introduce the players at a big rally downtown Seattle. That was fun. And then probably the biggest highlight of my career has been announcing the MLS Cup in 2019, which we won at home. And there were 3 or 4 years where it was the MLS Cup finalists were Toronto and Seattle, and this was the third time we'd met in the MLS Cup final, and we won it at home in front of the largest crowd ever at what was then CenturyLink Stadium. It's now called Lumen Field. But we had more fans in the stadium than at any other sporting event, including the Seahawks. So we hold the Sounders holds the record for that sporting attendance, but just the fact that we won it and just being able to announce that at the end. I mean, I was very nervous because I knew that, I didn't want to screw up, and it's such a big occasion, but I was also so excited because it was my team that had won the MLS Cup. And so that, like you see in baseball, the World Series, or in the football, the Super Bowl, winning that is the pièce de résistance, as we say.
Yes. Now, putting you on a spot, this is like asking you which is your favorite kid type question. So I know it's going to be challenging. Through the years, you've got to meet a lot of the members of the team, right?
Actually, that's interesting. A lot of people assume I mix and mingle with the team, but I don't really at all. Okay. There's a bit of a divide between folks who work in my line of work and the playing staff and coaches. Okay. But I know what you're going to ask me. Who's my favorite player?
Well, no, and that's the question. But yeah. I have a slightly different variant.
Okay.
who's the player that you'd want to go out to dinner with because you think it would be interesting to sit across the table and have an hour-long conversation with this person, over food?
Well, I just mentioned him, actually. His name's Steve Zakuani. He's a former player. Now he does color commentary on the play-by-play. Okay. He originates from Congo in Africa, but he moved to London as a kid, grew up in London, played for Arsenal Academy. Just a really nice guy. I've gotten to know him a little bit, but I don't know him in depth. But I think he would be a fascinating person to get to know more. Other folks, trying to think. If you were asking me my favorite player, one of my favorite players in the past was a guy who's no longer with the team. His name is Obafemi Martins. He's from Nigeria originally, and he played alongside Clint Dempsey. And I'm trying to think now. I think they both started at the club either 2013 or 2014. Brilliant pairing up front. They were just like magical to watch. I honestly don't know much about Obafemi. I don't know whether it'd be good for a sit-down dinner conversation, but he was one of my favorite players to watch, and it would be fun to just sit down and chat with him, I guess.
Okay. If you could announce your dream 11 lineup, what would be give me some examples of names that would be on there? And this can be from any league. You can mix and match.
Oh my gosh, that's very challenging. I think let me just go with the Sounders because that's easy. That's the team I know the best. In goal would be difficult because we actually have had 2 star goalkeepers in our history: Casey Keller, who played for the U.S. men's national team, and Stefan Fry. So it'd be a toss-up between those for goal. Defenders. He's no longer with us, but I have Chad Marshall in defense. I probably have a couple of our current defenders. Gemar Gomez Andrade and Nuhu, who's a fan favorite at the moment. He's from Cameroon. Midfield, no longer with us, but I'd have Osvaldo Alonso. He played with us for many, many years. Let's see, I'd have to pick probably, our current Sounders team is very, very strong. So I'd pick Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, Nicolas Lodero. Let's see. I'm trying to find another midfielder who I'd throw in the mix there. Name's escaping me at the moment. But up front, I would have Freddie Montero, who is, again, one of our team's long-standing players. He actually went away and came back. And one of my favorite forwards, Raul Ruiz-Diaz, who's still with the team, and Clint Dempsey and Obafemi Martins. So that I've probably chosen too many players there, but
that's okay. That's okay.
Those would be some of the greatest that have either played or still play for the Sounders.
Okay.
But if I was going to pick some international stars, you'd probably have to throw in Lionel Messi or someone like that, because he's generally regarded as one of the best in the world ever.
Right. Ever. Right. In your opinion, who's the Seattle Sounders' biggest rivalry?
Oh, that's an easy question. That's Portland Timbers. And it's funny as a rivalry because it's a bit like Manchester United, Manchester City. It's like you're essentially from the same place. Right. And I think Portland and Seattle are very similar. They're both from the Pacific Northwest. They're culturally very similar cities. And yet there's a strong rivalry between them. And it has been since 1975, actually, when Portland Timbers came into being. We came into being the year before that in a former iteration when we were in an older league, former league before MLS. So we've been playing essentially since 75, and in 3 years' time, that will be a 50-year rivalry.
Wow.
The fans on both teams, they'll say they hate each other. Hate in sport is, it's just more banter. It's no one really hates the opposing team, but they might hate the concept of the team, but they don't hate the people, but it's a strong rivalry. We always want to beat them. Same, Portland would say the same about us. They always want to beat us. You could have the greatest Seattle season ever, but if you lost to Portland, that would be like, that would be the most disappointing thing to happen that year,
Right.
And last year we beat them 6-2 in Portland, so that was like, yes.
Well, it's like if you go to baseball, like the New York Yankees.
Yes. And the Boston Red Sox or something like that. Yeah.
Well, just the Yankees. Okay, that rivalry is real fierce, but and I hate to use the word hate because that's such a strong.
Yeah.
They're despised. Maybe that's I can get away with that word anyway. But nobody likes the Yankees other than Yankee fans.
Yeah.
Because they always got all the best players and they do this and they do that. Well, but the sport would be much less interesting if there wasn't that type of rivalry. If everybody was just meh.
Yeah. And to be honest, the Sounders have been a very successful team since they started in 2009. We've won multiple trophies, and we've gotten a little bit of a Yankees reputation, to be honest. It's like one of the teams that people don't like because we're so successful. But I think the Portland fans in particular dislike us, and we'll taunt each other on social media. And they've only won one MLS Cup, and actually the MLS Cup was hosted in Portland last year, and they lost at home. So that was, you can imagine how ecstatic the Seattle fans felt about that. But there's lots. It's back and forth banter. But the funny thing is, like I said, culturally we're so similar. If you met each other in the street and you didn't know any affiliation, you'd probably be best friends with each other. It's kind of a silly rivalry in a sense. And so we like to think of them as our little brother. They're our little stepbrother from down south,
Okay. I'm sure they love that.
Yeah, I bet.
In baseball, if you go to a Mariners game, the Toronto Blue Jays seem to travel well to Seattle. Because it's the proximity to Vancouver, and you go to a Mariners game when the Mariners aren't doing well, and they're playing the Blue Jays, and it almost feels like it's an away game.
Right.
Are there teams in the league that travel like that? I mean, if somebody's coming to Seattle, does the LA Galaxy have a large fan base that travels with them, or is it not like that in the?
Yeah, I would say apart from Vancouver and Portland, Vancouver Whitecaps in Canada, there's not many teams that bring a ton of supporters with them. Because it's given the distance between these cities, it's not an easy thing to do. But there's usually, and a lot of this is pre-COVID, but back in the day, Portland would bring, 2,000 or 3,000 fans up, and we would do the same down there. Vancouver might bring not quite so many, but a good contingent. There are a lot of teams, clubs that we'll play, and there'll be like 50 fans from the opposing team in the stadium, and but that's a lot of it's there. Teams like Miami or something like that, which are far, far away, and maybe the only supporters that have traveled are probably Miami fans that live in Washington State or something like that for some reason.
Sure.
Yeah, but we've got one of the best traveling groups around, but the further it is away to play, the fewer fans can afford to do it. It's funny actually, because if you look at England and the Premier League, the cities that are involved in the Premier League are so close to each other, relatively speaking. It would be like your furthest away opponent is in Spokane or something like that.
Okay.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, the agony of having to travel all that way. That's English perception of distance is a lot different from American perception. I remember living in England and thinking, if I traveled 400 miles, that would be a long way away. But now I live in America, and I think, well, that's actually not very far away.
Well, the state of Oregon is larger than Germany.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, there you go.
We're a huge country.
When you're not the PA announcer for the Sounders, what do you like to do for fun and entertainment?
Yeah. I have a couple of dogs. I'm married, and I don't have any biological kids, but I have some stepkids, and I actually have a granddaughter. So family and home life is really important. I'll either be playing with the dogs or playing with my granddaughter or hanging out with my wife. I like hiking. One of the things I really appreciate about the Pacific Northwest is the beauty of the place, and I like photography. I've got we happen to live in a house that backs onto a stream, so I've got a couple of trail cams set up to view the wild animals and stuff. So I'm very much into the outdoor life if I can get outside. In the summer, I'm more of a fair weather hiker, but typically in the summer I'll be out hiking up the mountains, and I'll often go out on my own. I'm kind of introverted. I like to get away and think about things and just enjoy the beauty of the landscape around me.
Okay. So one of the questions I ask all my guests will be the next question, but because you're British and there's a stereotype, so I'm going to ask the question differently.
Okay.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Okay. Definitely. I'm a huge coffee fan, so I always ask people where to go for coffee.
Right. And I do appreciate coffee. I'm just not as into it as I am tea.
All right. Okay. That's fine. Where do you like to go for a good cup of tea in the area?
My pantry.
That was a fair answer.
to get the Tetley tea bags out of the cupboard, and
the Tetley tea bags.
Tetley, yeah. I get
why Tetley over say Lipton?
I can't stand Lipton's. There are different. Tetley is kind of traditional British black tea in a tea bag, and actually tea aficionados would probably be looking down their nose at me now. The fact
but
that
you're in the United States. I don't expect you to have access to the type of tea that a tea aficionado would expect of you.
Right. So I just use the Tetley tea bags. It's traditional black tea. It tastes good. I stick a tea bag in the cup, pour in the hot water with my kettle, made from my kettle, heat it up with my kettle, I should say, and then add some milk, and perfection. Okay. That's my breakfast drink. And then if I was to go out for a nice cup of coffee, I can recommend Victor's Coffee House in Redmond. I don't know if you've ever been to that.
I have not been to that.
Yeah, that's but I can't say that I'm an expert in coffee, so
that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming to be an expert. I just drink way too much of it.
I listened to a couple of your podcasts, and I knew that was a question that you that you often answered of your guests, and I could tell you were into coffee yourself. So
yeah, I drink way too much of it. I love the taste of coffee. Mm-hmm. I will drink tea. Mm-hmm. I have no discernible palate for tea. I mean, you could blind test me with the best coffee that the best tea that you could possibly imagine. You're like, this is amazing. And give me, a Lipton and I can't promise you that I would go, oh, this is better.
Yeah.
I just don't have the discernible palate.
And I just know I like black tea or Earl Grey tea, breakfast blend or something like that. I don't like what in England we would say herbal teas, or what in America we say herbal. You drop the H. Right. I don't like herbal teas. I don't like fruity teas, minty teas. I just give me black tea, please.
Okay. So last question, direct question I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let you have the last word.
Okay.
Do you go home often?
Back to England? No.
Okay. Do you talk to your friends from? Okay.
Yeah, I'm on social media like Facebook, connected with family only. So I'll back and forth with my family. I don't have a lot of um, friends, because once you've left a place, and it's 98. I've been out of the country now 24 years. You kind of lose track of friends and stuff, unfortunately. I've got some family I still connect with. My best friend from high school actually lives in America now, so I'll talk to her every now and again. But the only reason I would go back to England is to visit my parents or my niece and nephew and their families. I generally don't go back very often, but we are going this summer. Last time we went was back in 2018. Actually, Seahawks were playing in London, so we made a combined trip to watch the Seahawks play and visit my family at the time. But right, cost is a prohibition, and obviously with COVID, it was really hard to travel.
So part two of the question is, friends, family, have they ever commented that you don't sound the same as you did? Have you picked up, has your voice become Americanized? How's that?
I believe it has. Most Americans would say, who've never met me before, and they listen to me, they would say, oh yes, you've got a British accent. But I do get occasionally people say, you're from Australia. And I believe that's because if you combine a British accent with a bit of an American twang, it does turn into a sort of Australian, put another shrimp on the barbie, Bruce kind of sound. And when I've gone back to England, last time I was back in England, actually, might be the time before last, my sister commented that I sounded really funny. That was her expression. And I think it's, I've picked up Americanisms. I'm sure my accent's changed. I've picked up words that you don't use in England. So I'm sure I sound weird. I'm in this sort of middle of the Atlantic, stuck somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic.
Well, I will say, now that you've said that, the tonal quality has Australian.
Yeah.
But your phrasing is nowhere near how what few Australians I know, you don't put your words together like an Australian. So I wouldn't have thought that until you put, but it's because your sentence structure is not the same.
No.
Okay. All right. So this is where this is how I cheat. Every episode I ask this question. Okay. So what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
Well, you didn't ask me about my Narnia closet.
Oh my gosh, you're right. So let me set that up.
Okay.
So has it been on Twitter that you posted the pictures?
I
must
did,
be.
Yeah.
I think it was on Twitter.
Yeah.
So you were recreating the Narnia closet.
Yeah.
And I joked before this episode went live if you were in the Narnia closet, because then you said no. But
I'm in a closet now, but not.
Yes. But what was the inspiration, and how has it been received?
Well, the unveiling of the Narnia closet will happen tonight. Let me explain. I have a granddaughter. I mentioned previously. She actually literally lives around the corner, which is great. So we're very close with her. Her name's Moira, and it's just like one of the highlights of my life, being a grandfather. And we have this downstairs closet, which is actually bigger than the closet I'm sitting in at the moment, or at least it's longer, not quite as wide. It's about 8 foot long by about 3.5 feet wide. It's underneath our stairs, and it's where we hang our coats. So for some reason, I had this brainwave that I was going to convert the closet into the Narnia wardrobe. But I've called it the Narnia closet because it has the coats hanging up. So I had this dream I was going to do this, and finally I got round to it last weekend. And I don't know if your podcast ever has links or anything, but you could link to a picture of it if the listeners want to do it. But so I, in a Bob Ross kind of little trees type style, I recreated what I viewed as Narnia. So you go through the coats hanging in the closet, and on the wall, I've painted trees, which are covered in snow with brown tree trunks all around both sides, and at the end, I've painted a lamp post because if you're familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when Lucy goes through the wardrobe, the first thing she sees in the land of Narnia, it's snow covered and there's trees and whatever, but there's a lamppost with a shining light. And I've put blue sky and stars, which are a string of lights wrapped around the ceiling, but one of the lights ends up as in the lamppost. So it's literally like the lamppost has this real light shining. So I've recreated this, and I put a white rug on the ground to simulate snow. And tonight, Moira is coming around because we're having some guests around for dinner, and she's coming around with her parents. And I'm going to show her this. So I'm going to hopefully get a nice reaction video. I think she's going to love it because, you know, if you think of 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they love forts, they love creating things out of cardboard boxes and hideaways and whatever. So this is going to be what I envision to be a reading nook for her, where she'll be able to go and hang out. There'll be pillows in there and her cuddly toys and whatever. And she'll be able to, and one day I'm hoping I'll be in there reading the Chronicles of Narnia to her. And this will be like grandfather, granddaughter perfection.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I love that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I hope that you'll share the video on.
Yeah,
I
will.
And we can. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I'll re-ask the question.
Okay.
What else should I have asked you besides that? Because we were going to talk about that, and I did drop that one. So what else should I have asked you?
I can't really think of anything. You asked me all about PA announcing and things like that. I'm definitely a fan of the Sounders. Not all PA announcers are fans of the club that they announce for, and I've never announced for any other type of sport, which is kind of interesting. A lot of PA.
Do you want to?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
I'm very happy announcing for the Sounders, and if I retire as the announcer of the Sounders, I'll be very happy. I have one goal left, and that is in 2026. Seattle is in the running to be one of the cities to host the World Cup, not the World Cup final, but the World Cup competition. It's already been approved that Canada, Mexico, the United States will host the 2026 World Cup, and hopefully Seattle Lumen Field will be one of the host locations for a few of the games. So that would be my dream, to announce a World Cup game. I've previously had the privilege of announcing the U.S. men's national team, the U.S. women's national team, several other international teams in international competitions that have happened at Lumen Field. But announcing the World Cup would be such a fun experience.
Okay. Oh, that's quite the bucket list item to have.
It would be a bucket list item for me.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time and sharing your story with us, because I think it's great. I do have one last question. I have one last question. I've been to one hockey. Excuse me. Well, I've never been to hockey, and I was talking to the Kraken's announcer a couple weeks ago. And that one's still in my brain. Yeah. I've been to one Sounders match. If I go to I will go. When I go to another Sounders match, where should I sit because I don't know what's going on in the sport. So where would be a good spot in the stadium for a novice to watch the game?
You want to get up high so that you can get a perspective of the whole pitch. So as high up as you can in the second tier, the club level, they call it. Unfortunately, the third tier is usually closed off. We used to have that open before COVID, but they've changed that now. So get up as high as you can, just so you can get a good pitch perspective. And I recommend you take a soccer-loving friend with you, and ask him or her what's going on, what's happening in the game at this moment in time. I think it's a fairly simple to understand game, but people will tell me baseball's simple to understand, and I don't understand it. So it depends on your experience growing up watching it, etc. But I don't think it's that complicated. We do have a few complicated things. There's something called offside, which I won't begin to try to explain to you.
Because I don't want to escape.
Yeah. Don't want to confuse anybody. But basically, get up high so that you can see the whole pitch end to end. Maybe midfield position would be good. If you wanted to just go and soak up the atmosphere, towards the south end, there's a group called the Emerald City Supporters. They're a raucous crowd who wave flags and cheer and have chants and stuff. That's fun to watch, but you don't want to be standing behind them because the flags might obscure your view of the pitch. So if you're wanting to kind of learn more of the game, maybe the southern end, but not right behind the goal, more the sides of the southern end of the stadium, which is what they call the Brougham end. That's actually where I am. I'm in the third tier level in the southwest corner of the stadium, the announcing booth.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it too.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.